Hello everybody, this is a short video that I'm making to introduce you to our class in juvenile justice. The class is JUS 331 Q3077, Juvenile Justice Systems, our section 15EW3. One thing I would point out is that, my name's Rob Dawalt and I've been working in juvenile court for many years. I started out juvenile probation a long time ago, then I moved over to public defender, then I became what's called a juvenile referee, which is kind of like a magistrate judge, and then even after that I worked privately in a number of cases over the years, and recently I've kind of been working more in the area of youthful offenders, which is to say they're technically adults but they're still young people between like 18 and 25. One thing I want to share with you on this is that, there's going to be one of these videos every week, so I hope you take the time to view them. They're usually 15-20 minutes long, just trying to be helpful, kind of give you an overview of the material and then also some guidance on what's happening in the class. So in Module 1, you want to be looking at the different resources, and then there's a discussion on jurisdiction. You want to be able to do that. Important thing on discussion, try to always post at least 3 times, post before Thursday. We like you to have a longer post. Always include references if you quote something that actually you gathered from some other material. And then on further down, there's a journal that you need to do. It's called a Juvenile Justice Project Journal. Select your state. So you need to go into the journal section 1.2 and then look at your state where you live. This is what makes these classes so much fun, I think, interesting, because we can compare all these different states, and I'm going to discuss that as we go along, and I'll pull up information from different journal posts that you make, and I'm going to share those with the whole class. I think this is very good. Next thing, keep in mind there's a short paper that's going to be due, 1.3. It's due this next week, and that's on criminal culpability. Very important area, culpability. The whole justice system is based on culpability, which is to say what's their responsibility for things that happen as what we would call a crime. So you're going to have a final project in this that you want to be looking toward down the line, and then at the very bottom of the page we have this assignment guidelines and rubrics. So you should really look at these rubrics. Rubrics are good guidelines to help you understand what's important in the class. Now let's go over this a little bit. One of the things, just about every time I've ever taught juvenile justice systems, it starts out with a history of the juvenile justice system. And the interesting thing about that is people start this history a lot of different places. Me, myself, I like to go back a little further. A lot of times you see people talk about this in the 1900s. But the nice thing about this course is that it starts out talking in the 1800s. Juveniles for a long time, you need to understand, if they were disrespectful to their parents, then the father could kill a child and there would be no ramifications. That was just the way that it was. The father was the head of the household. Mother didn't own anything. Mother was really almost like a slave. And the children were slaves too. And the motivation to even have children is because most people worked on farms and they needed more farm hands, so you'd raise them yourself. You'd have kids, hopefully boys, and then they could work on the farm. So in the early 1800s, however, there started to be an interest in what's called a Latin phrase called parens patriae, which is to say the state, whether it's the state of New Hampshire or Indiana or Ohio or wherever you live, the state has the same duties as a parent when it comes to children. So in other words, if the parents aren't doing a responsible job, then the state has to step in and provide those parenting services. That started in the early 19th century in the United States. And again, we called that parens patriae, which is the Latin for, parents' duty to protect their children. And so this kind of changed those years of attitudes and beliefs that children, up until that time were more or less like a form of slave, and if the slave was not doing the job, and if they were disrespectful and so forth, then they could be severely punished or even killed. The shift then became toward a system that we have today now, which is called CHINS, which is to say child in need of services. And this is the ultimate outcome of this shift from being father being totally in charge and in control to being where the child is also somewhat of a citizen in waiting, and the state has some responsibility to protect that child. The other thing that was important at that time was that still in all, though, a lot of places, this took a long time for this to catch on, and a lot of places sold children into slavery and on the excuse that, well, they were incorrigible, they were unruly, or they were orphans. And so children would be given to people. And this went on for a long time. Even there's a new book I just listened to recently called Orphan Train. And it was based on the stories that are out there of children even up into the 1920s where the parents died and they just stuck them on a train, and then wherever the train stopped on the way west, if a farmer wanted them to work on a farm, he would just take them. If a guy wanted a young girl to work in a store, he would just take her. So there's a lot of this. Life was pretty hard for kids back in the 19th century is what I'm saying. But a lot of times people kept coming in this country. I mean, this is what's so crazy. You hear all this talk today about illegal immigrants and the problems and so forth, but this has been an ongoing thing in the United States since the early 1500s. I mean, people can come to this country because it's a beacon of hope, and the bad thing is that the people come from Ireland or Mexico or wherever, and they're starving, and they have these children, and they have diseases, and they have all these problems, and of course it's never quite as good as they thought that it would be. So children often end up left on their own, even if parents are working, and they get into trouble. We've talked about family roles just recently in a course that I taught, and so that's going to be coming into this every once in a while. But let's say that in about 1900, there seemed to be an interest in creating a special court just for children, and that court started. The first one that we know of was in Chicago. And so from about 1900 there on, then there was a lot of different ideas of what to do with children that wouldn't behave, that got into trouble. And some of these ideas were reform school, industrial school, or we have this just down the road, so I think it's pretty funny. They call it a youth development center, or YDC or YOC, Youth Opportunity Center. And it's kind of funny because the only real opportunity is the opportunity to learn how to be a bad criminal in some cases. Keep in mind that there's two basically types of juveniles in juvenile court. There is the delinquent juvenile, there is a status offender juvenile, and then a third type that's a non-criminal oriented child is a CHINS child, like I referred to earlier. CHINS, once again, child in need of services. So a status offense would be skipping school, running away from home, just generally will not listen to mother. Incorrigible is what we call, unruly or incorrigible. That's only an act that a child can commit. In other words, a father can't get in trouble and be unruly because he doesn't listen to his wife. He can get in trouble, but it's not a criminal act, basically. And delinquent act generally then kind of mirrors all the different criminal acts. Like, for instance, you can have robbery, rape, even kidnapping, theft, and just about anything that you would call a crime for an adult to commit would be a delinquent act for a child to commit. So these are all important parts of this. One thing too is the age of majority varies. In other words, you can be kept in juvenile court for a period of years, and that age varies. Some as early as 15, others all the way up to 18. And so it's usually between 17 and 18 that you can be charged in juvenile court. One thing is that I would like you to look at when you look at the overview is the stages of delinquent cases. I worked in this intake area, if you look at it. So basically the cases are brought in, the prosecutor works up the cases. There is a diversion program that can be done by prosecutors. I've never really seen it done that much. A lot of times it's put into juvenile court, if you notice, informal processing, and then you can take the case over to juvenile court. In the more serious cases, they waive the cases if you see that. And sometimes then they carry them on and put them into what we call residential placement, probation, or some type of aftercare. So it can be that the cases are pushed through the juvenile system, or at some point, if the case is serious enough, then the case can be waived into the adult system. So there's a number of different gates. The cases can go out, be dismissed, put in informal, can be released, told, don't ever do that again. And then the worst end of it is you can be waived into adult court and be sentenced as an adult. And then those are very serious cases, and we'll talk some more about that later. Well, I hope this little video was helpful today. Feel free to get a hold of me. I'll be involved in this, and you can email me just by hitting the tools area and look for send to email, and you can send me an email. So under course tools, you can always communicate with me. So basically, questions, any problems, whatever, feel free to get a hold of me. I'm here to try to help. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll be in touch with more later, I promise.